Hello everyone, Alger the SideQuest Gamer here, and one of the things I am the most sick of hearing about throughout my years on the internet is this fabled objective review, or objective critique. Is there such thing, or is it just a delusion of grandeur that comment section critics seem to have? Let's explore this much further, and I suggest getting a glass of milk or soda because this is going to be a while. Before we begin this video, just to satisfy any ignorance on the subject, I will give you the definition of objective and subjective. The definition of objective means of a person or their judgment not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering and representing facts. That was the Google definition, but to put it in layman's terms, it basically means judging something without an element of bias, without any personal feelings. But objectivism is more along the lines of factual. To say something is objectively good or bad is like saying your statement is true because you deem yourself as a nominee as the one who has no element of bias whatsoever. An example of an objective statement is like H2O being the chemical formula of water. That is an objective statement. Why? Because there's scientific evidence proving that a water molecule has 2 hydrogen atoms, hence H2, and 1 oxygen atom, hence the O. That is objective because it is a factual statement. Subjectivism pertains to a personal preference which does have an element of bias, while water being H2O is an objective statement. Saying water is beautiful or the water is ugly, that is a subjective statement. Whether water is beautiful or not all depends on the eye of the beholder, which is completely different for each person. No two people have the exact same eye, and the only thing factual about saying water is beautiful or not is the fact that is honestly how someone feels about the appearance of water, nothing more. Now let's apply this to video games, and I am even guilty of utilizing the objectivism term to give my opinion some weight, and I sincerely apologize for my past transgressions. I said in my The Many Faces of Nostalgia editorial that Spyro 2 and 3 are objectively superior than Spyro 1. That was how I honestly felt. However, some people do think that Spyro 1 is the best, and I was wrong for thinking they were incorrect for thinking so. They see something in the game that the other 2 games didn't have or as much of to the degree of Spyro 1. And I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it's not just nostalgia. Perhaps they like the freedom of exploring the levels at their pace. Maybe they like the lack of NPCs or even the simplicity of the level design. Spyro 1 has many things going for it, most definitely. But I only fell under this because I was under the delusion that some opinions do have more weight than others, but I didn't set this trend, as I've seen others use this objectivism wildcard in their reviews of video games like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, and I especially seen this being used in the comments section of those videos. Sonic Adventure is objectively a broken game, and anyone who thinks it's actually fun is a nostalgia-blind fool. I'd rather pour hot tea in my eyes than play this tripe ever again. The comments section really opened my eyes to this. Not only that, but whenever my colleagues would criticize a highly revered game, the others would game-splain them and using the objectivism card, rather than just state why they disagree. So on behalf of all reviewers, everyone get off their objectivism high horse, as I will explain why it's silly to use this for all aspects of a video game. In a review, the goal is to explain why you like or dislike a product. See? In order to make a review, the basis of it is to use subjective statements pertaining to personal preference as to what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy, and then explain why you did or didn't enjoy some elements in a video game. How can you say the graphics and aesthetics are objectively good when beautiful and ugly are the dictionary definition examples of subjective? I think Bubsy 3D is one of the ugliest games on the PlayStation, but that doesn't mean someone in this world would agree with me. There might be someone who likes the insane looking world of Bubsy 3D. They probably like the character models, and if they can enjoy the graphics, that's perfectly fine. I and many others would heavily disagree, but more power to that one person. Music, I would even argue, is more subjective, even though subjectivism really doesn't have a measurable value. But anyways, We're all into different types of music, and the goal of video game music is to go with the gameplay or even establish a mood or atmosphere for the game. Music tends to play with the emotions of the individual gamer in hopes of enhancing the gaming experience for them. So let's use Castlevania Symphony of the Night for this example. What do you feel when you hear this music in Dracula's castle? Do you feel terror? Do you feel an adrenaline rush? Do you for some reason feel depressed, happy, even annoyed? And with the graphical style of the Gothic-themed castle, does the music most importantly work with the setting it is in? I mean, what if it was just silent, no music? There would be no emotion, except for Alucard's grunts and sword slashes, as well as blood-curdling screams of the enemies that were just slain. But music conveys an emotion that is unique only to you. Some people may feel similarly, but not to the level as you. So graphical style and music, we can agree, are very subjective aspects of a video game. What if you think Symphony of the Night looks beautiful, ugly, or not as good for a PS1 game? Still subjective even when you compare the graphical styles to other games. If you think something like Bubsy 3D is better looking than Crash Bandicoot 3, then while the whole general population of gamers would disagree with you, it's still your subjective statement. They're not wrong for disagreeing with you, but you're not wrong for liking the appearance of Bubsy 3D. I personally wouldn't understand why, but you understand it, and that's all that matters. Now let's get to the controls and gameplay, and I have a lot to say about these aspects. Thanks to the release of Star Fox Zero, I can use that as an example. The gameplay focuses on your overall experience with a video game, from level design, enemy placement, physics, hit and collision detection, and most importantly, controls. The controls have a specific button layout and how it's implemented with button input. Like what actions are programmed as a result of a certain button input. Star Fox Zero makes use of motion controls, and some people love them and others hate them. The big question is, would the control scheme for a specific game make it enjoyable for you or unenjoyable? There's the subjective element. Whether you think a game like Star Fox Zero plays excellently with the motion controls or would be better with just a normal control scheme akin to its predecessors like Star Fox 64, it's all a subjective preference unique to you and only you. But what about the other stuff like enemy placement or collision detection? Do you feel the enemy placement is hindering your overall fun with a video game, or was it fine just the way it is? See, that's subjective even in itself. But what if the collision detection was programmed where instead of landing on a platform like you're supposed to, you phase through it and then die in a bottomless pit? What if you phase through the level geometry? Now that is a very good point I'd like to bring up, but I'll say this, the objective statement is that you phased through the level geometry and died, because it did actually happen, but that's it, that's all you can say. You can only acknowledge that it happened, you can only acknowledge it existed. It's not an objective flaw, because objectivism doesn't really allow for flaws unless there's scientific evidence. Like saying 2 plus 2 equals 5, that would be an objectively flawed statement because there's scientific evidence proving that it actually equals 4. However, what is subjective is whether it fits your personal definition or standards of good programming versus poor programming. Does it hinder your overall enjoyment with the game, or can you accept it for what it is and hold no ill will against the game for it? My friend Retropolis Zone brought up a very good point. What about something like loading times? Like really long loading times, kind of like Sonic 06's 30-second load times. The objective statement is talking about how long the loading time is, or averaging the loading times based on how many you encountered in the game, provided you mention the parameters of your average loading times. The subjective point is whether you think anything longer than a specific time is too long or not. The general populace would agree with you if 30 seconds is too long for a loading time, but it's still a personal taste that many people have. I could say that half a second long load times are too long, but that would also be a subjective statement, and if my statement is subjective, then so is saying a 30-second load time is too long for a video game. What if the game froze at a certain point, making it unbeatable no matter how many times you try to bypass that obstacle? You can acknowledge that it exists as your objective statement. Most people will get the message that it's bad, but objectivism doesn't allow for a good versus bad value. all you can do is acknowledge that this exists, but saying that is a flaw is your subjective statement. I will agree with you along with the majority of people, but that's still a subjective kind of flaw, because while you may deem it as a failure of the programmers, as I would and many others, there may be someone from another planet or dimension who doesn't see it as such. I know that sounds very insane, but it's true that even that cannot be claimed as an objective kind of flaw. The truth is that it exists. It breaks the game, but the fact you cannot beat the game is the objective statement. Whether you view it as a bad thing is subjective. And what about something like the story of a video game? This is where there is some ambiguous subjectivity that appears to be objective. Like many reviewers criticize the story of Sonic Adventure 2 for having so many plot holes, like Amy mistaking Shadow for Sonic. But that is an individual error. It may be annoyingly dumb to have Amy written like that, but what if that was the writer's intentions, to make her that stupid that she would mistake Shadow for Sonic? You can call these plot holes, and you have every right to call something a plot hole, but that is still some subjective taste, as it hinders your ability to enjoy a story. Some people may not mind that she mistaken Shadow for Sonic. But to go further into the plot hole discussion, let's use a movie example, citing how it should have ended skit for Star Wars A New Hope. Why couldn't the Imperials blow up that giant planet in order to find Yavin instead of waiting for it to orbit into sight? Well, maybe the laser needed to recharge, maybe they needed to conserve power, or maybe smaller planets require a meticulous laser size. You don't know the character's intentions, or maybe that was the result of Grand Moff Tarkin's human error, because human error is possible. We can't really rely on characters to be making all the best decisions, because they will make mistakes like we do in real life. Now, is that a flaw? On the character's part, yes, but it's not an objective flaw. The objective statement is that they waited for Yavin 4 to orbit into sight before attempting to destroy it. That's it. Questioning the logic of it rhetorically stems from your own subjective taste. Do you think the story characters are capable of human error? Do you rely on them to be perfect at all times? I do think what you see as story errors do deserve to be called out on, and I am not saying you're wrong for doing so, as it may ruin your enjoyment of the story in the game or movie. That's how talking about the story, even when describing the problems with the story, it's still subjective by nature because it's something you view as a problem to your viewing experience. Others might not mind that they wait for Yavin 4 to show up into sight. The point is that anything you like or dislike all stems from subjective taste. There is no such thing as an objective statement in a review, nor is there such thing as an objective review. An actual objective review would actually be totally useless, as it would be something like Star Fox Zero is a video game. It has graphics, colors, textures, enemies, and collision detection. It also has music, should you keep the sound on. It has motion controls. It has virtual space setting, stars, spaceships, and planets. It's all contained in a disc. It's for the Nintendo Wii U console. Does that review tell you anything other than the blatant obvious? No, it does not. I recommend watching Jim Sterling's objective review of Final Fantasy XIII, as he parodies this idea to humorous degrees and shows how utterly silly this mentality and longing for an objective review really is. And I think no one should be ashamed of embracing subjective taste. The review's importance depends on the reviewer's subjective taste in a video game, just so the consumer is aware of what they're getting into and how enjoyable it can be for some people. The reviewer must make comparisons, set personal standards on each video game aspect, and then discuss their overall enjoyment with a video game. I think objectivism stems from the idea of putting your feelings aside and trying to see a game from someone else's perspective, which is a great tactic for analyzing a video game. That's still subjective, but more like third-person subjectivism rather than the typical first-person subjectivism. I think it's important for all reviewers to do that. For example, I really don't like the first Borderlands game, but that's all because its style really didn't appeal to me. But it would be my job to analyze what did work and recommend the game to the audience it is trying to market to. Mainly by drawing comparisons with its genre. Borderlands is an open world game, right? You can argue all you want of whether it is or it isn't, but for the sake of argument, let's just say it is. So I would compare it with other open world games like Fallout 3, Elder Scrolls Oblivion, or Grand Theft Auto 4 and see how Borderlands stacks up to those games. I may not like the game, but the goal of the review is to inform in addition to giving your personal take on the game. So do inform the consumer on both and you'll have yourself an effective review. And it's still subjective. Even an analysis of the game is subjective regardless if you put aside your personal feelings or not. But do not get rid of personal feelings when recommending or not recommending a video game. I mean, Call of Duty, Mega Man, and the Pokemon games are all pretty similar with minor variations. If you always put aside your personal feelings, you might recommend a well-programmed game by your definition, but it's such an uninspired sequel to a tired formula that you weren't entertained by the game because it was just more of the same. Sure, it's a well-programmed game, but that really wouldn't matter to a consumer if they want the series to try something new and offer a new and original experience. Be sure to mention that you were bored with the game, as you don't want others to be bored with the game regardless if you think it's well-programmed or not. In conclusion, objectivism as a reviewer's delusion, but there is nothing wrong with subjective preference either. Whether people realize it or not, the subjective preference is the element that matters the most in the end. Every individual has their own definition of a well-made, enjoyable game, and their own definition of a poorly made, frustrating game. Some people look for things like a game explaining how to play it, like The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, and other people prefer the game to throw them in the middle of the action and let them figure out everything by themselves, regardless of how cryptic something is, like the original Legend of Zelda for the NES. Some people like the beat-in-one sitting trial-and-error gameplay, and others prefer their games to have a save system that takes them back to a certain point, making the game feel more forgiving. The individual is not wrong nor right for preferring one over the other. It's what they want out of a game, and that's all that matters to them. You can't really say that someone is wrong for having a lot of fun with a game that has a beat-in-one sitting mentality that makes you start the game all over if you lose enough lives. Nor can they say you are wrong for preferring a game that's more forgiving. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you claim your statement is objective, you can take your objective statement and shove it right up your